All right, everybody. We'll go and get started. Um, I want to talk about something today that I think is really important. I realized um, a while back I hadn't intended to do this, but it just kind of happened. I had it in my heart to teach the commandments, and I still do. The actual nuts and bolts of the commandments. And I found myself sitting down to do one of those teachings, and the teaching that ended up coming out was not about the commandments per se. It was things about accountability. It was things about the nature of sin. It was things about holy convocations and these types of things. And I kind of realized that what I was doing unconsciously was coming to the realization that keeping his commandments and by extension following the gospel is something that has to be done with a group. If you think about the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, you can't do that if you don't have a neighbor to love as yourself. That's the second great commandment. And so we need a group of people in order to properly keep his commandments. And oh, there we go. Is that better? Thank you. So we need a group in order to properly keep the Father's commandments. And that allows us other people to extend these things towards, but it also allows a feedback network to where if we need to be held accountable, there's somebody to hold us accountable. Because if it's just me on an island by myself doing whatever I think is right in my own eyes, there's no one to help me course correct. So community is vital. And so I realized that before I get into the nuts and bolts commandment keeping, which I still want to do, there's some foundations that have to be laid first, and this is one of them. So I might have two or three more of these type teachings. I don't know yet. And then eventually I'll get into teaching the commandments. But for now, this is kind of where we're at. I want to talk about the promise of compromise. And that is some very clever wordplay because the word compromise has the word promise in it. Compromise should be promising, and that's the actual root word for compromise. It's got the word promise in it for a reason. I know that myself, for years, when I would go to an assembly, if I would visit a group, if I would go to um, like a new group or whatever, a new fellowship or whatever, I was always, and maybe you guys can relate to this. I could just be a weirdo, and maybe it's just me, but I would always kind of like try to assess what other people in the group believed and compare that to what I believe. And because I'm always right, because I'm human and that's the way humans are, the group would always fall short. And so I kind of fell into that trap where the only perfect church, the only perfect group has one member, and that's me, because everybody else is wrong in some capacity, or at least not as right as I am. And I don't mean that like I'm the only one. I say I, meaning humanity in general. This is how we tend to think. But you realize after a while that you can't have an assembly of one because an assembly requires more than one. Otherwise, it's just me. And so we get into these things where if you're going to have a group of people that's coherent, you want some degree of unity, but you don't necessarily want conformity. Because if I'm part of a group of people that's all conforming to my beliefs, I'm going to be the only person in that group. We just keep going back to that because nobody's going to conform to all of my beliefs. It's not going to happen. And so, how do we kind of navigate this? The word compromise, it comes from the word com, which means together. It's the root word for community. Communism, that's the idea behind communism, is it's a collective. I disagree with communism as an economic and social thing, but that's what they're trying to get at in some weird, twisted way is a group thing. And promise. Promise has to do with giving ahead of time. It's got the word pro, which means before. And so when you promise something, if you think about it, like I promise to give X amount of dollars to whatever charity, okay? I haven't given that yet in the physical. What I've done is I've set forth my word ahead of time. I've given my word before I've given the thing. And so a promise, in the sense of a group compromise, it literally has to do, it's a legal term. and it has to do with being a joint promise to abide by an arbiter's decision. An arbiter is a judge, and if you have, we see this in divorce proceedings a lot. You'll have like some kind of a third party arbiter that will come in and will try to navigate the property disputes and custody battles and all this kind of stuff. And whatever that arbiter, whatever that judge rules, both parties are legally required to abide by. And the process of arbitration requires both parties to give something, because the idea is that there's some kind of rift and it has to be reconciled. And the arbiter's job is to reconcile that rift. And so I'll make a distinction here in a little bit between compromise and concession. I think a lot of times when we think compromise, we actually mean concession, because to have a true compromise, it involves at least two parties. If I want to go into an assembly and I have to give something up, but nobody else does, it's not a true compromise. That's a concession. And there's a time and a place for concession, which we'll talk about, but compromise is where the real promise is at. So we're going to talk about some Greek words here for a minute, and it might seem like this has nothing to do with compromise at first, but then I'll tie it in. So stick with me for a few minutes here. We're kind of build on some stuff, and then we'll kind of lead into the actual compromise theme. If we think about the relationship between spouses, we recognize if there's an imbalance where one spouse is always having to yield to the other spouse, but yet the one spouse never has to yield to the other spouse. We tend to think of those as maybe abusive. We tend to think of, if it's a husband who's always taking and never giving, and the wife is always giving and never taking, we would call that man a narcissist. We would say he's a dictator. He's dominating. We would have all these things because it's a one-sided thing. And you could flip that around. If the woman is the one doing all the taking and the man is doing all the giving, we see that clearly as an imbalance. So to have a healthy marriage, we know intrinsically, we call it choosing our battles. Everyone has to choose their battles. We have to know, as husbands, how much are we going to yield to what our wives want, and where are we going to put our foot down and say, I understand you want that, honey, but here's what I'm doing, and vice versa. And a healthy marriage will have a balance where both spouses are giving up equally. They're yielding on certain things, but not on other things. And if it's done properly, they're able to go forward together, and they're able to have hopefully a minimum of friction between the two of them. If we think of children, siblings, it's kind of the same way. If you've got the one child that always gets what they want and the other ones are always having to sacrifice something, we see that as an imbalance. And we see that when we have relationships like this, typically the one who always gets what they want will continue to be more driven towards taking. And the one that is always giving up something and never getting anything back will become resentful. Like, I'm always the one that has to yield. So-and-so never has to give up anything. And so obviously that's not beneficial for any relationship. When we think about, we're talking about love for a minute here. Who knows how many words are in the Greek Bible for the word love? We just have one word for love in English. How many Greek words are there for love? At least two. As far as I know, there are four in the Bible. There might be more like in wider Greek, but in the Bible, there are four words. There's eros, there's phileo, storge, and agape. Okay? So we're going to leave out storge. Storge is family love. It's you love somebody because they're blood kin. You can cultivate this type of love with adopted families or step families, things like this, but it's basically I love someone just because I'm related to them and for no other reason. That's sort of irrelevant to where we're going, so I'm not going to focus on storge today. But if we think about human beings, if a horse is born, that horse is up and walking within 20 minutes. And it grows rapidly, and it's an adult horse in no time compared to a human. We've got 17-year-old in our house who is still maturing into an adult. 17 years. And this is how humans are. We take forever. We've got babies who can't walk for like a year compared to the 20 minutes for the horse. And if you think about why is that? People who believe in evolution, which I am not one of them, they have their reasons. But I think it's because for human beings, the relationships that we have with each other are vastly more important than what you find out in the animal kingdom. Out in the animal kingdom, it's just survival and reproduction, just kind of basic. You don't need a whole lot to navigate there. But with us, with human beings being so dependent on each other, like you have the trope of a guy going out to live on his own in the wilderness. Like if I was to have to bug out right now and just go out in the wild over the winter by myself, you're probably never going to see me again, just because it's that dangerous. But if I had a community around me, if I had 10, 15 people, 20 people, whatever, it makes it easier to get through those things. But you can't do that without relationships and navigating, because the moment you have some kind of a point of friction, well, if one guy says, well, I'm out of here, and he goes out off on his own in the snowy hinterlands, he's going to suffer a grim fate because he doesn't have the community. So I think this is one of the reasons why humans are so slow to develop, because we need more time to cultivate and develop these relationships and learn how to be around each other for the good of everyone else. Your conventional animal doesn't need that the way we do. So if we think about those of us, most of us have had, at least most of us older people have had newborns. All of us have been newborns. So we'll just talk about this for just a second. If you think about a newborn child, from the perspective of the newborn child, at least as far as we know, because they can't talk, we kind of assume based on their little giggly smiles and everything, a newborn child, when they look up at their parent, it's agape love. It's not any of these others. Agape is where you love somebody just because they are that person and for no other reason. With agape love, you're pouring yourself out to that person and you get nothing back. You have zero expectations in that relationship. So a newborn child yes, they do need things from their parents, obviously. But as far as we know, they don't really have an awareness of that. They're not intellectually thinking, I need X, Y, Z from mom and dad. And if I don't get that from mom and dad, I don't love them. That's eros. Eros is the word that we get the word erotic from, and it has a certain connotation in Western English, usually romantic love. But in the Greek, eros is you love somebody or something because it gives you something that you want or something that you need. So it's a sensual kind of love. And we can see where that would be defined as romantic love. But the Greek philosopher Plato, I don't know a ton about Plato, but I know that he kind of redefined how this term was used in the Western world. He kind of broadened it out to where eros is not just you give me something in the physical and I love you because of it. It's you give me something, period, and I love you for it. Has anyone heard the term platonic relationship or platonic love, that kind of thing? This is where you see this sometimes with married couples where one of the spouses will have a platonic relationship with somebody on the side. It's non-physical, it's emotional, it's mental. And that's because that person is giving them something emotionally that they need, and they love them for it. You might have a woman whose husband doesn't love her the way she wants to be loved, but this guy over here does. And it can be non-physical. And she will love him platonically because he's satisfying something in her that she can't get from her husband. So eros is that type of love. And from the perspective of a parent, we love our newborn children, even though they can't really give anything to us other than spitting up on us and making messes and poopy diapers, right? They don't give us anything we need in the physical. They give us things we need emotionally, yes. But you don't look at a baby child that you have and be like, unless you make me feel good emotionally, little tiny baby, I'm not going to love you. We don't think of it that way. So the relationship between a baby and their parent, I would say, is more agape. It's not eros. When you look at phileo, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, that's brotherly in the sense of like friendship. It's a peer-to-peer kind of love. And that's a type of love that develops naturally. We think of Jonathan and David in the scriptures. They had phileo. I would think they also had agape, but we know for sure that we would define that as phileo. The disciples, when they first kind of got to know each other, probably had phileo. Eventually, they developed agape. But when they first got together, there was probably a degree of eros, like you're giving me something I need. I'm cold, and Peter's going to go over there and build a fire, and I need Peter to build that fire, so I love Peter for making me warm. That's a form of eros. But over time, you cultivate the phileo. But if you think about a family, as the child grows, they reach a phase as they get a little bit older, maybe up into their toddler years, where they progress out of agape into eros. And what do I mean by that? They start to realize that the parent can give them certain things, and they will emotionally respond when they're given those things. And if those things are withheld, the child will get upset. So the child is starting to have eros, where I love mom and dad when they give me what I think I need or want. And I don't love them, really. I don't like them. I'm upset with them. I think they still love, but they don't like the parents when that's withheld. That's eros. And of course, as the child grows and they start to have peers, they start to have friends, they'll start to develop phileo. But I think that we could probably all agree, if we were to look at ourselves, growing up, we didn't really function in agape. I know I didn't. As a teenager, as a young adult, even now, learning what agape is and learning how to live in that space, it's not something that's natural to us. It's something that's natural to the Father. I think it's something that's natural to the Son, but it's not something that's natural to us. It's something that we have to cultivate. Whereas eros is something natural, phileo is something natural, storge, that family love, is natural. So as that child grows, they have friends, they learn phileo, and I would say that most people in the world never really get past that. They never get past eros, they never get past phileo, they never get past storge. They never really get into agape. They lose it as they grow older from the point of being a newborn baby. And the problem is that when you lose something like that, you have to actually work to get it back. Agape love is not like riding a bike, where it's like once you don't have it for a while, it just comes to you naturally. I think it's something that has to be intentionally cultivated. If we look at it from the terms of adults, like starting off as an adult, okay? If I come into a group, it's the same kind of thing. I'm not going to come into that group and just right off the bat have agape for everybody. That's not reasonable. I would like to think that I could, but it's not reasonable. We're going to start off just like that child, minus the agape. We're going to start off with eros. We're going to come into the group, and we're going to identify who in that group gives us what we need. Do they give us good conversation? Do they give us, maybe they've got good taste in music. Maybe they bring good food. I mean, it can be anything. But they're giving us something that we need. So we're going to develop the eros first. As we get to know them, the phileo is going to come. We're going to start to have those peer-to-peer friendships and relationships. We're going to get that next level. But do we get the agape? Some people do, some people don't. But it's not as natural as the other phases. We have to work for it. And the thing about agape, if you think about that parent and that child, the child doesn't say, I don't want to be around you, mom and dad. And the parent doesn't say, I don't want to be around you, child, unless they're a complete horrible psychopath. Parents like that do exist. I would call them biological, whatever, not parents. True parenting, you would never treat your child that way. But the idea is that you have to move. You want to get back to where you were as a newborn child. We'll talk about this in a minute. You want to get back to where you were as a parent with your newborn child. The newborn child and the parent are together for no other reason than they want to be together. They're not thinking, I need something from you to love you, or we're just going to be buddies. A lot of parents want to be buddies with their kids. They want to stay in that phileo space. I would argue that that's not the space a parent and a child should stay in. You can go through that. Obviously, I want to be friends with my children, but that shouldn't be the goal of my relationship because I'm their parent, not their buddy. So basically, when we look at this from the perspective of a parent, to go back to agape, and we're going to talk about compromise here in a minute. If we are able to elevate ourselves to where we are truly operating in agape love, that self-sacrificing love, we're going to talk about this as we read some scriptures here in a minute. It's going to be like that parent to child, where we love each other the same kind of way we do a newborn child. And obviously, that's not natural. To love another adult the way you would a newborn baby is not natural. But if you think about that newborn baby, when each of my children, when they're little, they can't talk, they're slobbering, and it's like they're not giving me anything to satisfy Eros. They're not giving me anything to satisfy Phileo. But yet I would die for that child in a heartbeat, no questions asked. Why? They're cute, yes. My kids especially. But it's that agape. It's that self-sacrificing love. And that kid doesn't need to do anything to earn that love other than to be that child. That's it. They didn't earn it. They just were that child. And I would die for them in an instant. I would undergo torture for my children just because they're them. And I would jump in front of a bullet for your children. And that's the thing. Like that's where we need to cultivate. And it's so hard when we think about, and we'll read the scripture here later, greater love has no man than would lay down his life for his friend. When he uses that word love, he's not talking phileo. I'm going to give my life for my buddy or my friend, even though he does use the word friend. He says agape. So to actually die for someone that's a peer, that's a pretty big thing. That's not eros, it's not phileo, it's not storge. You only get that out of agape. And you only get that if you see that person's life as being more valuable than your own. So let's read Matthew. Let's go to Matthew. Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read verses 38 through 48. Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 48. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have also your coat. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. He's talking about giving something extra to somebody that they don't necessarily deserve. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That word love is agape. Agape your enemies. He doesn't want us just to love our enemies when there's a mutually beneficial relationship there. They're able to give us something that we need, even though they're our enemies. We've heard the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's because if I ally with the enemy of my enemy, we're both mutually benefiting from that, even though we kind of are enemies. It's a hierarchy of benefit. But he doesn't want us to think that way. Why does he say this? He says in verse 45, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? That's eros. They're loving you. You want to feel loved. And because they're loving you, you respond by loving them back. That's not what he wants from us. Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, phileo, your peers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect, complete, whole, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And so he wants us to rise above these basic, more primal types of love, which are perfectly valid types of love. There's nothing wrong with eros or phileo. But he wants us to go beyond that into a sense of completion, like his Father is. Let's go over to Mark chapter 10. And I promise we will get to compromise here in a minute. Mark chapter 10. And we're going to read verses 13 through 16. They were bringing children to him, so that he might touch them. But the disciples rebuked them. Children. But when Yahshua saw this, he was indignant and said to them, permit the children to come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of Elohim belongs to such as these. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of Elohim is like a child, whoever does not receive the kingdom of Elohim like a child will not enter it at all. And he took them in his arms and began blessing them, laying his hands on them. So if we don't receive the kingdom of Elohim like a child, we can't even enter it. Why is that? Because if we're receiving the kingdom of Elohim the way an adult would, where we want something from the kingdom of Elohim, and that's the only reason we receive it, because it will benefit us in some way, that's not what he wants. If we're looking at the kingdom of Yahweh as being surrounded by people who are like us, peers, and we want to be a part, we just want to have peer networks and things like that, it's not for us. We have to receive it the way a little child would. And a little child naturally loves agape before they kind of unlearn it and have to relearn it, hopefully. A little child automatically agapes people. I would say the one exception would be is, if an adult is abusive to a child, that child will learn pretty quickly, maybe I shouldn't be so close to this adult. But in normal type relationships where the parents are not monsters, that child will have agape. And they won't even have to think about it. It won't have to be nourished. It won't have to be thought about. It's just done. It's natural. So he wants us to get to a spot where that agape love is automatic, like it is with a child. I have a long way to go personally before agape love is automatic for me. I have to think about it. I have to consciously work my way that direction. And I'm sure a lot of us do as well. Let's go over to John 15. We're going to read verses 1 through 15. John 15. John 15, we're going to read verses 1 through 15. We might actually go through verse 7. We'll go through verse 17. I wrote it down wrong. John 15, 1 through 17. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it may bear more fruit. You were already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. That's a relationship. And it's an interpenetrating relationship. He's abiding in us, and we're abiding in him. So when you have two different beings, two different personages that have different wills, different desires, in order to abide in each other, there's going to have to be some giving and taking. Somebody's going to have to budge on something. Verse 4, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. A lot of people look at this verse and ones like it, and they'll pray for things, just expecting, whatever I ask, it's like, and then they don't get it. Maybe we don't get it because we don't truly abide in him the way we think we do. Maybe we take it for granted that we do, but we really don't because we haven't fully cultivated the agape love yet. That's what it takes to truly abide in him. Verse 8, my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. If we don't bear much fruit, we're not his disciples, no matter how much we say we are. Just as a Father has loved me. Now, every time he uses the word love here in English, it's going to be this word agape. It's not phileo, it's not eros, it's not storge. It's agape every time. If you keep my commandments, let me go back to verse 9. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. I'm just going to start saying agape here instead of love. You abide in my agape, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his agape. These things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full. He wants our joy to be made full. This is my commandment, that you agape one another, just as I have agape you. Now, if we think about how Yahshua loves us, Paul talks about it in terms of a marriage in Ephesians. And there are other, we sang the song Dance With Me earlier today, kind of tying off a Song of Solomon. And it's this idea of he likens his people to his bride. And we know that in Revelation, it specifically says the New Jerusalem is his bride. But we know that the New Jerusalem is going to be made of his people who are following him. So, you can get into the weeds on that, but I think they're equivalent based on that. But anyway, so the idea is that we have to reflect the same agape love to each other and also upwards to him as he does downwards to us. Greater love has greater agape has no one than this, that one lay his own life down for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Now, this is a compromise statement. This is a compromise statement. He just says, greater love has no one than this, that they laid down his life for his friends. If I lay down my life for any one of you, that's a form of sacrifice, okay? And it's agape. But then the next thing he says, you are my friends, meaning he will lay down his life for us if we do what he commands us. Now, he's going to command us to do things sometimes that we don't necessarily want to do. We know if we look at the Torah, there are some of those commandments that sometimes we wish weren't in the pages. We wish they were never told to Moses because somebody couldn't point to it and say, James, see right here, here's chapter and verse why what you're doing is wrong. Because I might want to do that, and I don't want to be accountable. Oh, I do want to be accountable. I'm saying this as an example rhetorically. But our flesh is going to want to make this box where sin is in the box and everything we do is outside the box. That way we can point to that box and say, see, my actions are all okay. So-and-so's actions are in the box. Bummer to be them, but mine are all outside the box. But he's saying that if we are going to be his friends, which he would lay down his life for us, which he did, we will keep his commandments. So there's going to be times where we don't want to keep his commandments, and we make a sacrifice by saying, not your will, but mine, or not my will, but yours be done. And we see this in the garden. That's a compromise thing. He has a will, and his father has a will, and he's comparing those two. They don't line up. And he's saying, you know what? I'm going to give your way, knowing that you will give my way. But it's not this eros thing where like there's an arrangement, like I'm going to give you under the condition that you give me. They're not thinking of it this way. They're thinking of it, like if you think, I use the thought exercise sometimes. If Yahweh gave us nothing, let's say there was no eternal life on the table, there was no remedy for suffering, all of these things, like we get nothing good from him. He does nothing for us other than to just be who he is. Would we appreciate and want to serve him anyway, just based on his own merits? If we take away the blessings as an enticement to follow him, and we take away the curses as a deterrent from not following him, would we still want to just because who he is? If we can say yes, we're getting into agape. If we can't really work through that, we're not quite in agape yet, because we need things to push us into that wanting to follow him. So let's keep going. Verse 15, no longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name or my authority, he may give to you. This I command to you, that you agape one another. It's a command. It's not optional. And so if I'm going to agape, he says, agape one another, there has to be at least two people there. Another implies plurality. So this command to agape one another cannot be kept outside of a body. It cannot be kept at home watching YouTube videos. It can't be kept at home sitting and reading our Bibles diligently with Strong's Concordance and everything else out. No, it can't. It has to be done in a body. Period, full stop. And I know that as a person who fell into that trap several years ago of looking at the different groups and saying, well, this one falls short, this one falls short, this one falls short, compared to my expectations, not thinking that maybe my expectations are unreasonable, I deprived myself of the opportunity to show agape because I wasn't in an environment where I could. And so on my own personal journey, I was set back a few years because I didn't have the opportunity to cultivate agape because I wasn't putting myself in contact with other people who I could show it to. So I'm pointing the finger at myself first because this is a lesson I've had to learn the hard way. So this is where we talk about compromise versus concession. So when we look at a group and you go to a group for the first time and you kind of, like I said earlier, you kind of naturally assess where everyone's at. You know, what kind of a group is this? Are they a Pentecostal charismatic type group? Well, I don't believe in speaking in tongues. Are they speaking Hebrewish and wearing tallits? Well, I don't believe in Jewish tradition. I mean, you could do all these things, right? You have your own ideas of what it should be like, and you're comparing it to that. And of course, you're right. You're always right. Our flesh is always right. And so when we look at that and we say, well, if I want to be a part of this group, let's say it's a charismatic group, and I don't believe in, speaking in tongues. I don't believe in the typical charismatic stuff, but I really want to be a part of that group for whatever reason. The knee-jerk reaction is if we're going to do that, we have to concede. And we normally say compromise. I would have to compromise my beliefs to be in part of that group. What we really mean, because compromise means mutual promise. It's a two-way promise. In this environment, we don't mean compromise, we mean concede. So if I go into that environment, and I do believe in speaking in tongues in certain contexts, I don't personally follow the full charismatic thing, but in certain contexts, I believe it's reasonable and valid. But if I'm going to be a part of that group, if I'm going to do that, I have to concede. And there's a couple ways I can do this. I can lie and say, oh, I totally believe and totally agree in everything you guys are doing. And I can keep that belief to myself, disagreeing with it the whole time, but holding that inside of me and just not expressing it, while the group gives nothing back. The group doesn't come my way at all. They don't budge. I'm the one conceding to be a part of that group. Or I could just say, well, all of a sudden, I believe in the whole charismatic experience. Yay. Did I really believe what I believed to begin with? Because if we can just change what we believe on a dime just to be a part of a group, we didn't really believe it to begin with. If I decide I want to join a Jewish synagogue because I really like the people there, maybe I've got coworkers that go there and whatever, and I really want to be a part of that group, they're going to at some point want me to come towards Judaism, maybe convert to Judaism. And if I'm going to convert to Judaism, I have to concede my belief that Yahshua is the Messiah. I have to concede my belief that the New Testament's valid. How do I do that? I either lie and I hold that belief to myself. I'm a part of this group that is antagonistic to one of my core beliefs, but I keep it silent and I keep it in just to be a part of that group. Or I just say, well, I don't believe in the Messiah anymore. Like I never really did, if I can just do it that quickly. So either way, concession puts a person in a bad spot. If you have to concede to be a part of a body, it's that kind of relationship thing we talked about earlier, where if one spouse is always conceding and the other one's not, there's going to be some resentment there. There's going to be some pent-up feelings. And eventually, maybe you leave that group because you just can't do it anymore. When you concede, like when we think about compromising, what we really like in a situation like that, if I was to use the word compromise, what I really mean is I'm not being true to myself. I'm not being authentic. I have to hide who I am to be a part of this group. And compromise doesn't require that. Concession does. Compromise does not. Let's read Acts chapter 2, the whole chapter, just to kind of get a flavor of this. And think about these people. I am going to read the whole chapter. We just talked about charismatics, so I have to read all of Acts chapter 2. But think about these as real people like us, okay? If anyone's seen The Chosen, there are some criticisms of The Chosen that I have, But one of the things I really love about it is they reflect the people as real people. They're not glorified. They're not sugar coated. They're not glammed up. They're real people with warts and wrinkles. They go through trials. They suffer just like the rest of us do. And so I really appreciate that. But think of these people as real people like us. When the day of Pentecost or Shavuot had come, they were all gathered together in one place. There's our first thing. One place. One place. Obviously, they didn't have the internet back then, so they weren't gathered together in a Zoom call or something like that in one place. They had to physically go to one place. And to physically go to that one place, they had to take all of their beliefs with them, all of their preferences, all of their interpersonal desires and expectations. They had to bring all of those with them to the same place. So keep that in mind. Suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. There appeared to them tongues as of fire distributing themselves, and they rested on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit was giving them utterance. Now there were Jews living in Jerusalem. Imagine that, right? Devout men from every nation under heaven. Why? Because this is one of those 3 pilgrimage feasts. Everyone was supposed to come at that time to Jerusalem for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, the Feast of Weeks, the Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So you had all these people here. When this sound occurred, the crowd came together and were bewildered because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. They were amazed and astonished, saying, "Why are all these people who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? Parthians and Medes and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes." Now, proselytes were people that converted. These are Gentiles, like the example I used earlier, these are Gentiles who would have converted to the Judaism of that day. Now, this being Acts chapter 2, these are not believers starting right off. These Jews, and I would say Hebrews would be more accurate, but these people all came in. The ones who were there keeping Pentecost, Peter and the gang, they were Jews, but they were also believers. These ones all coming in are not believers yet. They're coming in to see what all the ruckus is. But they're proselytes. They had left their pagan ways and they had adopted the Judaism of the day in some capacity. Cretians and Arabs, we hear them in our own tongue speaking of the mighty deeds of Elohim. They all continued in amazement and great perplexity, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others were mocking and saying, "They're full of sweet wine." But Peter, taking a stand with the 11, raised his voice and declared to them, "Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and give heed to my words." I don't have to read this whole chapter. I'm doing this because I really want to repeat what Peter is saying here because it's gospel, and I don't think we have enough gospel sometimes. "For these men are not drunk, as you suppose, for it's only the 3rd hour of the day. But this is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel. It shall be in the last days." So from Peter's perspective, they're in the last days, and I would say in some capacity that's true. I think we're more in the last days than he was back then. But Elohim says that I will pour forth my spirit on all mankind, on your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. And your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my bondslaves, both men and women, I will in those days pour forth of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. I will grant wonders in the sky above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and vaporous smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious day of Yahweh shall come. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. Men of Israel, listen to these words. Joshua the Nazarene, a man attested to you by Elohim with miracles and wonders and signs which Elohim performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of Elohim, you nailed to a cross or stake by the hands of godless or unrighteous men and put him to death. But Elohim raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. For David says of him, I saw the master always in my presence, for he is at my right hand, so that I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue exulted. Moreover, my flesh also will live in hope. Why? Because he will not abandon my soul in Hades or Sheol, nor allow your Holy One to undergo decay. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. Brethren, I may confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And so, because he was a prophet and knew that Elohim had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his own descendants on his throne, he looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah. So he's interpreting the psalm here, that he was neither abandoned to Hades or Sheol, nor did his flesh suffer decay. This Yahshua Elohim raised up again, to which we are all witnesses. Therefore, having been exalted to the right hand of Elohim, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured forth this which you both see and hear. For it was not David who ascended into heaven, but he himself says, Yahweh said to my master, in the Hebrew there it's Adonai, I think, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Therefore, because of what he just said, let all the house of Israel, not just Judah, know for certain that Elohim has made him both master and Messiah, this Yahshua whom you crucified. Now when they heard this, they were pierced to the heart, and they said to Peter and the rest of the apostles, Brethren, what shall we do? Peter said to them, Repent, and each of you be baptized in the name of Yahshua the Messiah for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. For the promise is for you and your children, and for all that are far off, as many as Yahweh or Elohim will call to himself. I want to pause here. There's some hidden compromise language here. We're supposed to repent and be baptized, giving something his way. He is going to give the Holy Spirit our way. It's a two-way thing. There's no conceding. For the promises for you and your children, and for all that are far off, as many as Yahweh or Elohim will call to himself. And with many other words, he solemnly testified, and he kept on exhorting them, saying, Be saved from this perverse generation. So then, those who received his word were baptized, and that day were added about 3,000 souls. They were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. So they're listening to the disciples' teaching as a group. They're praying, they're fellowshipping, they're breaking bread. Everyone kept feeling a sense of awe. And I mentioned a week or two ago this idea, we used the word awesome, like, oh, this fried chicken's awesome. We've watered down the meaning of the word awesome. Awe, true awe, should be something that just knocks you on your hind end, just knocks you off your feet. Like, it's just overwhelming. You're in a sense of, like, true awe, you could almost say would put a person in a catatonic state. It's almost overwhelming. So these are people who are astonished. They're not just thinking like, wow, this is cool. They are almost overwhelmed by what is happening here. Many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles, and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. Not some things, all things. How do they do that? They began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Now, compromise language. Is there anything here that says that they made some kind of agreement like, well, I'm only going to contribute? Now, we know Ananias and his wife had an issue, later on, partially giving. But is there anything here where it talks about the people saying, well, I'm going to contribute X, Y, Z, but only if you do? There's not. That would be eros. This is agape. They're all voluntarily giving up things for the greater good. Day by day, verse 46, continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising Elohim and having favor with all the people. Yahweh was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. Now that one mind, do we think that automatically they just came into complete lockstep doctrinal agreement? Every single little thing that they believed all of a sudden just aligned perfectly, just like that? Is that reasonable? I don't think so. But yet they're in one mind. And this is where I talk about the idea if we seek unity of purpose first, ahead of unity of doctrine, the unity of doctrine may come on the back end. But if we seek unity of doctrine first, we're going to divide over the doctrine. We're all going to be looking for that one perfect church with just me in it, but I want everyone else to agree with me. We're going to be doing that thing. But if we can stay in unity of purpose, the doctrinal unity may come, or at least we might get closer to it. So these are people that are all together with the same purpose. And this is where I say unity does not have to mean conformity. Conformity, in order to conform to a group, you're conceding. And this is not what we're called to do here. If the whole group is agape, self-sacrificing for the good of the group just because the group is there and for no other reason, then everyone is giving equally, everyone's provided for, and there's no eros, there's no I'm only going to do this if you give me something back. We're skipping all that. So I think in this, we're kind of seeing all at once here. Like people are getting what they need. And if I'm in this group here that's gathered together in one mind and I'm on hard times and I'm being given something to help out, there's going to be some natural eros there. The people that are giving to me, I'm going to love because they're giving to. Like that's a kind thing to do. I'm going to respond in eros to that. And the longer I'm in that space with them, the phileo is going to grow. But the agape is what's driving all this. And so I think here in Acts chapter 2, it culminates with all of these different types of love being experienced simultaneously, self-reinforcing and pushing each other forward. And it all starts because they decided to be together in one place. That's the key. Let's go to Acts 15, a few pages over. We're going to look at another example of compromise. I'll try to wrap this up here pretty soon. But I don't want to shortchange it either. Acts 15, we'll read the whole thing. And it's important to set this up because we start off with a demand for concession. And the decision, because remember we talked about compromise, there's an arbiter involved in the technical legal term. There's a judgment. And that judgment is going to be a compromise. Some men came down from Judea and began teaching the brethren, unless you're circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. When Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and some others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders concerning this issue. Therefore, being sent on their way by the church, the assembly, they were passing through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, who were bringing great joy to all the brethren. So these Jewish believers are excited and happy that these Gentiles, who are normally the enemy, are being brought in. Remember how we were told to agape our enemies? To the Jews of that time, the Romans, the Gentiles, were public enemy number one, the tax collectors and such. But they're excited that they're coming into the camp. That's not natural in this cultural context. When they arrived at Jerusalem, they were received by the assembly and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all that Elohim had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who had believed, so these are Jews of the sect of the Pharisees who actually believe, it's a thing. Paul describes himself this way. They stood up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to direct them to observe the law of Moses. So they are demanding that these Gentiles give something, but there's no indication that these Pharisees are giving anything back. There's no two-way movement. So they're demanding concession from these Gentiles. Now imagine being an adult. I won't go into too much detail here, but imagine being an adult and you've got these other adults who are demanding that you just come in and boom, be circumcised to be a part of the group. These people were circumcised when they were 8 days old. Is that fair? These guys, who they don't even remember what it was like, they want me to be like that's not right. I can imagine how, from the perspective of these Gentiles, that would be a point of resentment. The apostles and the elders, verse 6, came together to look into this matter. After there had been much debate, so they don't agree. They're going into this not agreeing. They're debating. Peter stood up and said to them, brethren, you know that in the early days Elohim made a choice among you, that by my mouth the Gentiles would hear the word of the gospel and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, testified to them, giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did also to us. And he made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by faith. Now, therefore, why do you put Elohim to the test by placing upon the neck of the disciples a yoke which neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But we believe that we are saved through the grace of the Master Yahshua in the same way that they are also. All the people kept silent, and they were listening to Barnabas and Paul as they were relating what signs and wonders Elohim had done through them among the Gentiles. After they had stopped speaking, James answered, saying, Brethren, listen to me. Simeon has related how Elohim first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name. With this, the words of the prophets agree, just as it is written. After these things, I will return. This is from Amos, and I will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which is fallen, and I will rebuild its ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh. And all the Gentiles, all the nations who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who makes these things known from long ago. Therefore, it is my judgment that we do not trouble those who are turning to Elohim from among the Gentiles, but that we write to them that they should abstain from things contaminated by idols, and from fornication, from that which is strangled, and from blood. For Moses from ancient generations has in every city those who preach him, since he is read in the synagogues every Sabbath. Then it seemed good to the apostles and the elders with the whole assembly to choose men from among them to send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, Judas called Barsabbas, and Silas, leading men among the brethren. And then he talks about this letter that they send, basically saying what's going on here. Now, why do I say this is compromise? These Pharisees want a concession, okay? They want these Gentiles to come in and be circumcised and start keeping the Torah pretty much perfectly right off the bat. Even though you can't get into the synagogue to learn the law of Moses, like it's an unnecessary demand. They're wanting these people to concede. The compromise is saying, look, you Pharisees who are demanding that, we're going to let these people come in even though they haven't been circumcised yet. So you are giving up something that you want. You want these people to be circumcised day one. We're saying, no, they're not going to be. So the judgment is these Pharisees are going to concede their requirement for circumcision. But the requirement on these Gentiles is you don't eat things strangled. You don't eat blood. You got to stop fornicating. You got to give up these really gross things that you're doing. So both parties have to give up something in order to actually be able to be together as one in the same place at the same time, the synagogue. And this is a necessary compromise because think about this. If these Gentiles have to concede to these Pharisees, their growth is delayed. Who knows how long? Because they can't come in where the nourishment is. There's a barrier there. Paul talks about it in Ephesians, this partition. And it's there unnecessarily. So they can't come in. And these Pharisees who could benefit potentially from having a relationship with these people, because just because you're not Jewish, just because you don't have access to this book from the time you're a baby, doesn't mean you're a bad person. All of that possibility is stifled because we're insisting on concession. And so James, as the arbiter, rules for compromise. He says both sides are going to give up something that's dear to them in some way to make this work. So that's pretty huge. We read John 15 a little bit earlier. I want to go back to John 14 now. We're almost done. Oops. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter because it does kind of overlap with 15, which we already read, but I'm going to read probably till about verse 15. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in Elohim, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Now, I mentioned compromise. If we think about your will, not mine, be done. If we think about his sacrifice at Calvary, he gave up something very, very precious, his own life. And the fact that he says, your will, not mine, be done, means that on some level, he didn't want to give that up. I can't imagine any human being wanting to be tortured the way he was tortured. But he gave that up and submitted to that process, knowing that it was necessary to have that oneness and that union with his people. He could have insisted on concession. He could have insisted that you guys, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. You guys are going to repent and do all this stuff, but I'm not going to do anything at all to come your way. We'd have no body. We'd have no hope. We have this hope because compromise. He gave something we're required to give something. But let's keep going. Um, Verse 4, and you know the way where I am going. Thomas said to him, Master, how do we know where you're going? How do we know the way? Yahshua said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Master, show us the Father, and it's enough for us. Yahshua said to him, Have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, Show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? There's that interpenetrating language. One is piercing into the other one, and it's this mutual thing. If you imagine it like a handshake where hands lock. The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his works. Believe in me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. Greater works than these he will do because I go to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, agape, you will keep my commandments. So this is kind of his last thing here. But I want to emphasize, he talks about here back in verse, where is it? Back in verse 10. He says, the words I say, I do not speak on my own initiative. When you initiate something, it's because you want it to happen. So he's basically saying here, kind of in a nice way, I'm not really on board. That sounds bad. The impetus for me doing what I'm doing is coming from my Father. It's not necessarily coming 100% within me. So in other words, he's elevating the will of his Father above his own. Why? Because he says it several times here. He and the Father are one. So you could almost say, and I have to be careful how I say this, you could almost say that there's a compromised relationship between him and his Father. To be in that unity, that state of unity, where they don't have exact lockstep wills, but the Father is giving to the Son, and the Son is giving to the Father, and they're able to maintain that. And that's the model for how we are to be one with each other, but also to be one with them. And so it all happens, like if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. I mean, we could just go on and on there. But I mean, the big one, love your neighbor as yourself. We just kind of go back to that. You got to have a neighbor. You got to have a neighbor. So some practical considerations. I mentioned this earlier. Part of the reason why I'm doing this teaching was because I did a post on Facebook, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, talking about just compromising in general, and there was some lively discussion. People were bringing up, well, if the only church in town is a Catholic church, I don't believe in Catholicism, but yet I want to be a part of a body. Am I supposed to just compromise? It's a good question, right? Because it's not good for man to be alone. He wants us to be together. If the only group in your area is a Catholic church, but you don't believe in going to church on Sunday, you don't believe in the sacraments, you don't venerate Mary, all these things, do you just compromise just to be around people? And in this case, it would be a concession, because that Catholic church is not going to do anything to meet you halfway. They're not going to say, well, I know you believe in keeping the fourth commandment on the seventh day of the week, so we're going to move our church services over to Saturday just for you. They're not going to do that. If you want to be a part of that group, you're going to have to concede certain things. You're going to have to hold your beliefs to yourself and not practice them within that group. And we get back to that same conundrum. You're either going to have to lie about your beliefs, or you're going to have to find some way to not believe them. Otherwise, you're going to have this friction that's just going to build and build and build. The relationship's not going to work. In this case, I would say, and this is across the board, we all individually and as families have to find out where those lines are for us. Because if we have to concede to be in a group, there's no compromise, it's a one-way giving, it's probably not worth being in the group. And that's where you have to take stock of the big picture. Sometimes it might be better to be alone. Because at least if you're alone and you're doing things that you can see in this word or truth, and you're not having to concede because you have the whole guilt by association thing, If you don't believe in the fundamental tenets of a group, but yet you attend there regularly, everybody else thinks you agree with the fundamental tenets of that group. It looks like you're in lockstep with them, even though you may not be. So it might be better off just to not be a part of that group. When we look at true compromise, this is where everybody's going to have to, like in a group like this, we have different pronunciations of the name. Yod He Wah He. I've heard over the years Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yehovah. There's even different variations there. So some people are really hardliners. I will only associate with people who say it this way. Some people are more loose with it. I will associate with people who say it differently. I would say one is more compromising and one is more conceding. And we have to set those boundaries. How far are we going to go? And when I say compromise in this, we're talking about beliefs. I'm saying I hold a belief and it's low importance of me to push that belief on the group. The group does not have to conform to my beliefs on this one thing. I'm willing to just hold my belief, and it's not existential in the sense of like, it doesn't have to do with, holding the New Testament as being valid, anything like that. It doesn't have to do with these weightier issues. We're talking lower level stuff here. And we have to be able to kind of have a hierarchy of relevance where we say, these are the things that I will not compromise on. These are the things that I will not give up anyway, in any direction, to be a part of a group. For me, Yahshua is the Messiah. That's a deal breaker. I'm not going to be a part of any group that will not let me express that in the group. It's done. I'm not going to be a part of it. For me, keeping the seventh-day Sabbath holy. I'm not going to be a part of a group that won't allow that in the group. But we have other beliefs. Like I have beliefs. I won't say them because saying them will undermine my point. But I have a lot of beliefs that people would consider weird or fringe. I generally don't share those beliefs. And I consider that a form of compromise. It's not essential to me for everybody in the group to agree with me on those beliefs because they're low-level relevance. On the higher level beliefs, we do need to agree on, otherwise we can't be a group. And so everybody has to decide where those limits are. Where are those lines of compromise? And if we look at the group and we see, okay, I'm willing to kind of give into this a little bit, but the group is not budging. Now we're in concession mode as opposed to compromise. How long are we going to be in that environment before we say, you know what, this is not for me, I'm out? Because there's no compromise. And every family, every person is going to have a different perspective on that. So we all have those decisions to make. Where are our lines? How far are we going to give into a group before we realize I'm going to go here but no further? And we have to have those lines, because if you don't have those lines, you really don't have principles. You don't have integrity. You're just kind of going for the group for the sake of the group, just because you want something from the group. There's that arrows thing again. You're conceding because you want something. But if we can compromise and everybody mutually compromises, promising together, then the group can come together around the more important, weightier things, and the group can have stability. Let's go to Amos 3. We'll conclude with this. Amos 3. Amos comes after Hosea. We're going to read verse 3. And I think that this gets misinterpreted. Actually, let's just start in verse 2. You only have I chosen among all the families of the earth. He's talking about Israel. Therefore, I will punish you for all your iniquities. Do two men walk together unless they have made an appointment? Now, I like my New American Standard because it says, unless they've made an appointment. A lot of translations will say, unless they are in agreement, or unless they agree. And I've seen it distorted over the years to where two people can't walk together unless they agree, meaning have the same opinions and same beliefs and things like that. And that's true on some perspective. If you are walking with people that completely disagree with you on everything, that's going to be a stressful trip. It's going to be a really grating walk. It's not going to be good. You have to agree on at least something. But here, they translate it more accurately unless they've made an appointment. So if two people okay, hey, will you get together with me and we're going to go for a walk tomorrow morning at 8? Sure. Okay. So we're going to get together, the two of us or however many, at a certain place at a certain time, and we're going to walk together. Just thinking of like walking through the park or something. The fact that you have made an appointment to walk with somebody at a certain time, at a certain place, means that you want to be with them. You have agreed to be together in order to walk together. This verse does not imply that you can only walk with somebody if you agree about stuff. So, and if we go back to Acts chapter 2, all those people did not agree on everything, but they were in one place at one time with one mind because they agreed to walk together. And so each of those people, if we put ourselves back in their shoes, they all had to figure out where their boundaries were. They all had to figure out, okay, I'm going to give this up. But it wasn't in terms of, I'm going to give this up to get something back from the group. That's eros. It was, I'm going to give this up because I love the group. That's it. And for no other reason. But if everybody does that, the whole group blossoms and grows. But if people hold back, like Ananias, and they promise something to the group, but they don't really give it all to the group, well, obviously we see what happened there. They were judged for it. And so if we're going to compromise, it has to be with equal weights and measures. It has to be in the right spirit. And it has to be done because we actually see the value of the human beings in the group. And that's why we're compromising. We're not conceding just so we have phileo, just so we have a group of peers. We're not conceding just so we can get something we want out of the group. You know, it's like we don't come to the fellowship just because, you know, there's a buffet and we like the food and that's all that's eros. But anyway, all this to say, we have to all figure out where those boundaries are, where we're going to give without the expectation of getting. Because the moment we put that expectation of getting on our giving, we're missing agape. We're stuck in eros. We're stuck in maybe phileo, probably eros. And eros is not what he wants. We have to be like little children who love agape. They love mom and dad just because they're mom and dad. We have to be like those parents that love their little children who don't really give them anything but messes and lack of sleep just because they're that person. They see the potential in that person. And if we can learn to walk in eros, because eros is good in its own way, if we can learn to walk in phileo, and if we can stay in that space long enough with the intention of developing agape, eventually the agape will come. But in my opinion, the agape never comes unless we compromise to keep the group close enough together to cultivate it. If we're going to concede and if we're going to divide because, well, I'm compromising more than they are, there's an imbalance. I'm giving up more than they are, so therefore this is not the group for me. We're never going to be able to develop agape. We're never going to be able to truly express it the way the master intended. So I'm going to leave it at that. I feel like that was a little bit long-winded, but I wanted to get it all out. Compromise has the word promise in it for a reason. And if we can learn to do it properly, we will be able to realize the promises that we've been given. But if we can't learn to compromise properly, or if we're stuck in this idea of, I'm going to concede just to be a part of the group, then we're missing all the benefits here. We're missing all the richness that is available for us. So I'll close it at that. Hopefully that was not too heavy-handed, but I think it's really important. And, you know, this is one of those things where if I'm going to point the finger at somebody for not seeing this, it's at myself first. I missed this for so many years, and I have regrets about that. But at the same time, I'm glad that I was at least able to see it at some point in my life. Because if I went to my grave without seeing the need for compromise and without seeing the potential for agape, because I think if I was to summarize this whole thing, I would say you cannot have true agape unless you are in a group and unless everyone is compromising and giving something. Like you can't, because agape is self-sacrificing. You can't be self-sacrificing if you're by yourself. You have to be surrounded by people that you can pour into without expecting anything back in the cup. And of course, if everybody's pouring out, then your cup will be filled anyway. But if you're pouring out with, because I have to pour out so that they'll pour, like, it's nuanced. The moment you start thinking of it that way, you're kind of coming out of agape back into eros. So anyway, just something to consider. I hope that was a blessing. I'll open the floor at this point for questions, comments, and strong opinions that are relevant to the teaching.